Greetings, everyone. I would like to ask the members to take their places. Greetings to everyone, and welcome to the 26th meeting of the Standing Committee on Official Languages. This morning, pursuant to Standing Order 1082, we're going to study the broadcast by the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation of the Canadian Songwriters Hall of Fame Gala. Just before beginning, I would like to inform the members that I received a letter from the president of the Canadian Francophone Cultural Association. The Federation regrets to learn that the terms of its statement when Maurice Bélanger left his position as a critic of the official languages caused problems within the committee because that was not its intent. By paying tribute to the political work of the federal member for Ottawa-Vanier, the Federation remains fully aware of the diligent work accomplished by all members of the Standing Committee on Official Languages to defend the Canadian Francophonie's arts and culture, and with a view to ensuring the next arts and Francophone policy of the Canadian government. The Federation recognizes the committee's work to ensure the well-being of the official language minority communities to a perspective of globalization. So we will now hear our witness, Mr. Richard Stursberg. Welcome to the Standing Committee on Official Languages. As you know, the mandate of our committee is to promote linguistic duality. And within that context, we ask you to make your presentation of approximately 10 minutes, and that will be followed by a round of questions from the committee members. Mr. Stursberg, you may go ahead.
My name is Richard Stursberg. I am the head of English services for the CBC, including television, radio, websites, etc. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to come and talk with you today. I understand that you have invited me here as head of CBC's English services to discuss our March broadcast of this year's Canadian Songwriters Hall of Fame Gala. In order to do that, I think it's important to provide you with some context about how we, at English Services, contribute to Canada's shared national identity. First, as you know, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation is an arm's-length Crown corporation. Its mandate, as well as the independence of its programming decisions, is spelled out in law in the Broadcasting Act. Je crois qu'à titre de radiodiffuseur.
I want you to know that as Canada's public broadcaster, I believe that we have a special role to play in providing opportunities for French and English-speaking Canadians to share their culture, their views, and their experiences. No other broadcaster in this country does this, building bridges between the two communities. And at CBC, we do this every day.
Or token gestures, to put one culture in front of the other. I'm talking about sharing cultures in a meaningful way. I'm talking about taking creative ideas from one culture and adapting them for the other in a way that works for the audience and in a way that respects both cultures and the broadcast medium. Voici pourquoi CBC et Radio-Canada.
That's why CBC and Radio-Canada work together on joint projects of deep cultural significance to both cultures, such as documentaries like Hockey, A People's History, the miniseries on Trudeau, and the miniseries on René Lévesque. These series aren't some cheap translation of another language's programs. They are created together from inception to broadcast. When we produced the sitcom Ciao Bella, the lighthearted look at the experiences of an Italian-Canadian woman living in Montreal, we shot every episode twice, once in English, once in French. The completed series ran on both CBC television and the television of Radio-Canada. Every day, our foreign correspondents give a Canadian perspective on international events, filing their reports in both English and French. No one else does that. On election night, and for significant nation-building events, CBC and Radio-Canada work together to offer the best national perspective Canadians can get. In the last 2 years alone, we've jointly produced over 200 specials.
We continually look for new ways to bring French culture to English Canadians in a way that will resonate with our audiences. In 2004, we launched the half-hour weekly show Au Courant with Mitsu Gelina, a show dedicated to telling English Canadian audiences about what French Canadians were talking about that week. Oui, et c'était moi-même, effectivement, personnellement.
And in fact, it was me personally who decided on this, because when I was with Téléfilm Canada, I chaired it, and when we funded the major films made by Denis Arcand, Barbarian Invasions, Mitsu plays, as you know, acts in that movie, and for that reason, I had the pleasure of getting to know her, and that was my idea of asking her to host this show.
Because she is an artist that some English Canadians are at least a little familiar with from her career as an actress and as a pop star. Si l'on regarde les 3 dernières années seulement,
in the past 3 years alone on CBC television, we have a broadcast of French language hits like Les Boys, Grand Ours, and Seducing Dr. Lewis, as well as 36 other French language titles representing almost 70 hours of programming. Since 2002, our Newsworld documentary stream, The Lens, has commissioned and broadcast more than 30 documentaries with our colleagues at RDI or other French language broadcasters. We co-produced the award-winning Culture Shock, where emerging Anglophone and Francophone journalists share their perceptions of the experiences of other Canadians as they travel across the country.
On our English web radio service and on Sirius Satellite Radio, we offer a segment called The French Connection, where our host, Craig Norris, holds a music exchange with our colleagues at Bande à Part at Radio-Canada, introducing new music to each other and our audiences. Several times a year, CBC Radio 3 and Bande à Part host live events together, bilingual concerts with musicians performing in French and English. We did this last month during Canadian Music Week. Sur CBC Radio, la populaire émission...
On CBC English Radio, the successful C'est la vie continues to offer English Canadians a window into the lives of French-speaking Canadians from across the country. It has celebrated the career of diva Diane Dufresne, talked to a new wave of young political Quebec filmmakers, traced the origin of poutine, and celebrated French love songs. One of its most popular segments is Word of the Week, which introduces Anglophones to distinctly Canadian French words and phrases. The English radio program, Apropos, broadcasts nothing but French music and French artists from Canada and around the world. Last fall, CBC Regina and Radio-Canada put together Mon Pays, My Country, a bilingual evening of country music featuring Brad Joner, Donny Parenteau, Véronique Labbé, and Louis Bérubé.
Performing at Festival du Bois in British Columbia, Brigitte Poulin and Sylvia Mandolini, 2 of Montreal's hottest new artists, performing the Canadian premiere of Le Souvenir de l'Oubli by Montreal composer François Rose. Thérèse Montcalm singing in French and English at the Franco-Manitoban Cultural Centre. The list is extensive. Canada Live broadcasts live concerts from every region of the country. 1/3 of that content features French artists. It was Canada Live, in fact, which broadcast the entire Songwriters Hall of Fame. Permettez-moi de faire quelques commentaires au sujet du...
Now let me say a few things about the Songwriters Gala. CBC has hosted the gala for the past 3 years. The actual program is long, over 3 hours. Every year, we have broadcast the entire 3.5-hour program on CBC Radio 2, because you can do that on radio. It was also broadcast on CBC Radio 1. Every year, we also take an edited version of the show, cut from 3.5 hours to 44 minutes, to broadcast it on CBC television. That edited program features artists that are popular with our audience, and that's also what we did this year. Now, I understand that songwriter Claude Dubois was upset that he was honored at the gala, but was not part of the broadcast on CBC English television. I'm very sorry he feels that way. And I'm sorry for the perception in the Quebec media that we, at CBC English Services, were insulting French artists. That was not our intention. For all of that, I am sorry. But frankly, to call us racist and anti-French is outrageous. And I am a little surprised that members of Parliament, who were quick to express their desire to investigate our broadcast, did not speak out against that kind of attack. It is beneath us as a country. It is insulting to the people across CBC's English services who work in all the ways I have described to try and find ways to showcase Quebec culture to our English audiences in a way that works. That's not an easy task, and to call them racist is wrong and unfair.
We at CBC English Services are making programs that are, by definition, for English-speaking audiences. If they don't understand our programs or can't relate to them, they won't watch them. It's as simple as that. So we find ways to adapt French culture in ways that they will watch. Stories like Rumors, our version of the French hit comedy Rumeur, or our current hit, Sophie, set in Toronto instead of Montreal, as is Les Hauts et les Bas de Sophie Paquin. We will continue to look for those kinds of stories, for ways to showcase French artists, for ways to tell English Canadians about what's going on in French language communities, for ways that CBC and Radio Canada can work together to bring the best to Canadians. We do it because we believe in it. Now I'd be pleased to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Stursberg. We will now proceed with the MPs. So we'll start with the official position, beginning with l'honorable Denis Coderre.
Monsieur Stursberg, merci d'être ici aujourd'hui.
Mr. Stursberg, thank you for being here today. I've been working for national unity for 25 years. Modestly, very humbly, for the past 25 years, I've been trying to build bridges between communities. And with such an institution as CBC Radio-Canada, your role is not to say that it is the fault of the MPs because they asked for an inquiry too quickly. It's certainly not our fault if, when an event that is broadcast to celebrate singers and songwriters, in that case, your role is not only to please English language audiences. I mean, you told me about, you've mentioned Poutine and you've mentioned Mitsu, but your role is to demonstrate that that event celebrates what our country represents. 2 languages, several cultures, but especially the 2 founding cultures of our country, French and English. And my citizenship is inclusive in that regard. So obviously, yes, you can cite all the events that you have planned and all the broadcasts that you have ensured, and I commend you for that. But a specific event, when we call for an inquiry on it, was because we want to hear both sides of the story. I'm a fan of Claude Dubois. I was insulted. I have to tell you that. Raymond Lévesque, too. My culture is nonpartisan, not separatist, and to see that it's as if I took a picture with you, a photo, and I told you to move over so I could cut part of the photo out that you're in. So I'm not putting CBC on trial here. I just want to understand what happened. And put yourself in our shoes. If we did something with Anglophone singer-songwriters, and we said, well, listen, we only have 3 hours, and in fact, we have to cut that down to 44 minutes, or we're going to cut everything that's English, because, you know, we're Francophones. We only listen to French music. How would you feel about that? I mean, it is rather insulting, Mr. Stursberg. So either you produce a broadcast and everyone is there, and within 40 minutes you can represent both English and French cultures. I'm not saying that you haven't done your job in other areas. You know, we're not talking about Don Cherry here. We're talking about that event, and we want to understand what happened. It took two days of outcry for you to come back and respond to that, and that's why there's an inquiry. I think that's why we called an inquiry here. So all I want to know is, next year, are you going to do the same thing? And are you going to cut things as you did? We need to celebrate songwriters, not to please audiences, because that's the status of CBC, to show what's happening in our country. That's part of your mandate. So yes or no next year, if there are Francophones, are we going to be once again second-class citizens, or are you going to do your job, fulfill your mandate, and ensure that Francophones and Anglophones are on an equal footing? That's what I want to know, very, very simply.
You know, it's very interesting. Just to put this in perspective, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, the entire thing was on radio. When we cut it down to 44 minutes for television, what we were, you know, obviously when you take 3.5 hours and you cut it down to 44 minutes, a lot of stuff has to go. A lot of stuff has to go. Good stuff. Our task was, in this year, made particularly difficult by the fact that the great pianist Oscar Peterson had just died, and this was the first huge tribute to him. So, we cut it back. But I think it would be wrong to believe that we cut out only French-speaking singers. We did not. We also cut out English-speaking singers. So among those who were honored at the gala, who were inducted into the Hall of Fame, were Les Emerson, Alex Kramer, Dean Taylor. None of them.
Mr. Stursberg,
none of them.
Hold on a second.
None of them.
I understand that. It's not the issue here. The issue is that you had some people from French-speaking culture who are there, and none, zippo, nothing, nobody was there. My question is simple. If you're supposed to represent, if you want to talk about ratio, let's talk about ratio. But if you have some representative and you want to put both culture at the same level, don't you believe with me that, of course, you had to cut back some others and there's some Anglophone, but when I'm reading what you're saying that we have to cut because, as you know, we want to please our watchers who are Anglophone.
C'est précisément ça.
Claude Dubois,
précisément ça, c'est le problème. C'est le problème. Nos éditeurs sont des anglophones. Et franchement, comme j'ai dit,
that's the problem. And as I said in my remarks, if I put someone on the screen that no one knows, well, they're going to change the channel. Excuse me, Mr. Stursberg, just a moment. Just for the interpreter's purpose, I would like one person to speak at a time. So please let Mr. Stursberg finish before going ahead with your questions. Mr. Stursberg, I'm very familiar with the media, with the world of communications, and I know how CBC works. You had a golden opportunity to... I mean, listen, you could be the savior of the two solitudes here. You had a golden opportunity to build bridges and to disseminate the message to the rest of the country, not only to Quebecers, that you have people from different cultures. How can we not learn about the other culture if you don't broadcast them? Answer. As I said in my opening presentation, we are trying to build bridges by producing documentaries jointly with our colleagues from Radio-Canada and LDI, and by producing musical broadcasts, children's programming. Mr. Coderre, please. Your time has elapsed, and I'm going to allow Mr. Stursberg to answer the question briefly. And then we're going to the next member. Mr. Stursberg, go ahead, please. I think that the best method of doing so is doing it by respecting the different languages and cultures of our two cultures, by building bridges that will work. We need to do it in a way that is respectful of our audiences. Thank you, Mr. Stursberg. We will now go on to Mr. Richard Nadeau from the Bloc Québécois. Thank you very much, Mr. Stursberg. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to thank my colleague, Daniel Petit, who brought this subject forward. And it's extremely justified. Mr. Stursberg, I have heard you today, and I'm going to try to be as objective as possible in analyzing this issue. Obviously, as concerns culture and identity, what I have heard is extremely disappointing, and I'm going to explain as follows. First, you have told us is that the problem is that there is an English language audience, and we need to respect their culture, and we need to not offend them too much. And therefore, that's what you had to work with. On the other hand, when I look at it from my viewpoint, Quebec represents, or rather pays 25% of the taxes to CBC, like Francophones outside Quebec, and they also pay their share of the taxes to CBC. So it's not a question of history, it's a question of respect as part of a gala that is supposed to be the apotheosis of singers and songwriters and music who are the standard bearers for this music. Now, yes, you produce documentaries, that's fine, but we weren't talking about documentaries in this broadcast. We were talking about culture, Quebec culture, Franco-Canadian culture, Acadian culture, English-Canadian culture, in an ensemble to show all Canadian taxpayers, regardless of where they live in the country, that we have a certain variety and we have extraordinary artists that represent this variety.
Now, Mr. Dubois decided to bang his fist on the table, and he wasn't just doing it for himself. He was doing it for everyone. And you're surprised that this was in the media. But listen, we also found this out ourselves, and we ourselves felt excluded. I think I'll just tell you a little story. This is how I see CBC, and I think it's unfortunate because I still have this story in my mind and this image of CBC. There was the Série du siècle. And there's a time spent in an embassy in Soviet Union, and the person involved has to learn how to pronounce the names of the Soviet player. So they go through this exercise. But he never was able, there were people who were never able actually to learn the names of Francophone players, hockey players. In 1976, we would listen to Hockey Night in Canada on CBC. And we heard all kinds of names mispronounced. And we still hear that on CBC. And those are our reference points, but we do not see them in CBC. In Saskatoon, we would always see CBC French. I never, ever saw SRC Anglais in Quebec to describe the English channel. So let's just think about this and let's try and reflect reality in the CBC. Now, why is the word racist used? Why is it used? Because people feel excluded. And what does that mean? It means you take some people and you don't take other people. And in this case, it's the Francophones who have been excluded. So we need to focus on that. So don't talk about other programs. I know perfectly well you're doing other programs. But in this case, we're talking about music and the people who are in the pantheon, who are at the apotheosis of music. So your program, your 45-minute program, should be reflecting taxpayers in Canada, and they should be able to see themselves in your programming. So here's what I'd like to know. I read the various articles I think they go back to the month of March. That's not too long ago. And what I'd like to know is if you have started rethinking the way you're representing culture that exists throughout Canada. I want to know if you're rethinking how that will be reflected in your programming at the next gala. Well, we're thinking about what we should be doing, yes, with respect to the gala. But I'd like to come back to the point I was making to Mr. Coderre. We made an enormous effort within CBC to reflect this country's reality and also to build bridges between cultures. I mentioned all those programs. I mentioned the various activities on screen and on radio that have been conceived with that purpose in mind. Now, in this case, we're isolating and taking one program and to say that because of one program we need to take certain types of actions, well, I think that's a rather limited way of thinking. Mr. Stursberg, I understand what you're saying. However, I want you to be very aware of the fact that if we're holding this meeting this morning, it's because we feel that there are Canadian implications throughout the country, and that this program is broadcast throughout the country. Sir, the rules of the game were clear to everybody. As I said, we broadcast the same program 3 years ago. And each and every time, we put the focus on the singer-songwriters who were well known within English Canada. This doesn't reflect any change in policy on our part. And when we signed our contract with Mr. Dubois, we indicated clearly in the contract for Mr. Dubois what the conditions, broadcasting conditions would be. In the contract, we said that the gala would be broadcast in full on CBC Radio 2 on Sunday in March 2008. And the highlights of that program would be broadcast on CBC Radio 1 on Monday the 3rd of March. With respect to television, the highlights would be broadcast with Paul Anka and Oscar Peterson on Monday the 3rd of March. Mr. Stursberg, I understood the contents of the contract, but I would like to point something out to you. I am a teacher by training, and when I ask students to give me the names of singers and songwriters throughout Canada, whether that be in English or French Canada or Quebec, they have trouble in naming them all, and the same applies to actors. But they had no problem in naming American songwriters and actors to me. So what we have to do then is highlight and put a focus on Canadian, Francophone and Anglophone singer-songwriters and actors. Because otherwise, it'll simply be American culture that our youth will be interested in. So we have to make sure that all of them are reflected in your programming. I think we'll have to give an opportunity to everyone here to have the floor and to speak, so let's respect the time periods allotted to each member. Mr. Godin. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to the Official Languages Committee. I know that this shouldn't necessarily be where you should be this morning, but according to the information I have here, this isn't the first time that the Francophones have been excluded from broadcasting and broadcasting the gala. Is that true? Well, as I stated earlier, no, it's not the first time. When we broadcast this gala on television, now not on radio, but on television, as I pointed out, we broadcast those better-known musicians, Anglophone musicians, for our English audience. So let me think about your attitude for a minute. Well, what that means then is if we have Jean-François Brault, a good Acadian songwriter, it means that he would never be known in Quebec because Radio-Canada could decide that, well, he comes from Acadia, so therefore we're not going to broadcast him on Radio-Canada because he's not well known in Quebec. There are only 250,000 people in Acadia, so we won't bother listening to them. That's what your attitude implies. The same applies to Hank Williams or Jean Lecage, because they don't sing in French. So here's my problem. Let's say you have a program and someone decides to make certain comments, but your audience isn't capable of understanding those comments. Well, comments. But we're talking about music. There's a difference here. It's a gala. We're talking about music. I've gone to various events where we've invited Aboriginals to come and sing. Well, the audience didn't understand a thing. I didn't understand a thing of what they were singing, but I loved listening to them. I loved listening to the music, to the song, everything. Now, we have three cultures. We actually have more than three cultures in Canada, but we have the First Nations, and then we have the French and the English who arrived from Europe, and we have Radio-Canada. And when CBC decides to broadcast a program, how can we start excluding certain songwriters? If Anglophones are familiar with Claude Dubois, maybe it's time to make them aware of Claude Dubois. Is that a question? Well, do you want more questions?
You know, we can go through this 3 or 4 different times, and I'm sorry if you don't like my answer to the question. But I think that you have to grant one simple premise, which is that we actually, well, two. One is that we actually know something about how to program radio and television networks in a way that works best for our audiences. And two, that in the context of attempting to actually build bridges between French and English Canada, we want to do so in a way which is going to be most effective. I really don't believe there's much point in making programs that people are going to turn off. People won't learn anything in that way. So, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, we have made enormous efforts to be able to do this, whether it's through dramas, documentaries, musical events, it doesn't matter. Why we single out this one program, I frankly do not understand.
And if you're deciding, well, that the rest doesn't count, then I'm completely confused, absolutely confused. And I'd just like to continue for a minute. It's my impression that the committee members believe that CBC and myself are anti-Francophone. I'm sorry. Point of order. When there's a point of order raised in the committee, then we have to interrupt the person who has the floor and listen to the point of order. Mr. Coderre, it's all very well to have a political debate here, but there are no anti-Francophones in this room, and I would ask the witness to withdraw his remarks. He's here because he's accountable to taxpayers. He's responsible for a public institution, and I do not accept here being called anti-Francophone. We're just seeking the truth. And I think we're right. We were right in calling you here this morning, given your attitude. Thank you, Mr. Coderre. Listen, I think this is a rather sensitive issue.
Okay. C'est ça, Monsieur Coderre.
Thank you, Mr. Coderre. I think that was rather a point of interpretation and debate. I think it's clear to me that everyone holds linguistic duality dear to their hearts. And I would ask Mr. Stursberg to continue, and perhaps it will give him an opportunity to correct perhaps an impression that he left the committee with. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't want him to use my time to correct that impression. That's fine, Mr. Godin. So what should I do? Should I continue with Mr. Godin or respond to Mr. Coder? No. You can now continue, Mr. Stursberg. Well, that was my reply. Fine, that's your response, but that's why I'm having trouble. You're talking about the specific case, but this specific case deals with songs. Whether it's CBC or any other channel, do you think that when we listen to TV, we turn it off just because we hear an English singer all of a sudden? I mean, that's what you're saying, Mr. Stursberg. Well, my colleagues at Radio-Canada follow the same policy. They don't put Anglophone singers on the screen. And allow me to continue. That's the truth. And even my Radio-Canada colleagues didn't broadcast the show. I respect their decision. I respect the fact that they decided not to broadcast the same show on the screen. Mr. Chairman, you said Radio-Canada didn't broadcast it. It was in Toronto. It was a huge program, an Anglophone program, but they did invite Francophones. I'm sure there are Radio-Canada programs and events where someone sings in English, but it's not cut off just because someone's singing in English. Well, yes, there are programs with Francophone musicians, as I mentioned earlier in my opening comments. But with respect to this specific show, the gala, that's the point I was making. The point being that Anglophones do not want to listen to French-speaking songwriters, that they'll turn off their TV and listen to another channel? Yes. Yes, that, in our judgment, is what happens. The danger is that if we broadcast someone who isn't well known in English Canada, yes, but then who is going to make them aware of these people? Well, we made that decision, yes. You can agree or disagree. But those were the grounds that we based that decision on. So would you use that same reasoning today? Given everything that happened, would you make the same decision again? Yes. We'll now move on to the next member, Mr. Chong.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Stursberg, for appearing today. I wanted you to come today, to have CBC here today, not to rehash the events concerning the Songwriters Gala and singer Claude Dubois, but rather to take that opportunity that issue highlighted and talk about how you're fulfilling Sections 4 and 6 of the 1991 Broadcasting Act. But before we go on to that discussion, I think something needs to be responded to, and that is that you can't have it both ways. You can't say on the one hand that your programming decisions are independent and then demand that members of Parliament respond to criticisms that some third party made about your independent programming decisions. You know, you stated earlier on that you're independent in your programming decisions, but then you also state that you're surprised that we didn't speak out against Mr. Claude Dubois' remarks. You know, if your programming decisions are independent, then people who comment on them aren't really our responsibility, especially if they're not parliamentarians and they're simply citizens. So, but anyways, that being said, the reason why I wanted you here today is to talk about how you're fulfilling Sections 4 and 6 of the 1991 Broadcasting Act, and in particular, Section 4 reads that your programming should include the particular needs and circumstances of English and French linguistic minorities, while Section 6 reads that your programming should contribute to shared national consciousness and identity. And so in light of that, I think you've highlighted some of the things that the corporation has been doing to fulfill that part of the act. You know, the television show Sophie, some of the other initiatives that you've undertaken in recent years. But I think that there's a lot of people who often wonder if there isn't more that can be done. And, you know, I think about things like news gathering. You know, I can't tell you how many nights I've watched the national news on CBC's main television network, and then I watch the same national news on Radio-Canada, and, you know, they could be from two different countries, frankly. The topics, the focuses are completely different. So I think while there have been some efforts to gather the news jointly, and I have seen that, in many cases that doesn't happen. And so that's one area that I think the corporation could do a better job in fulfilling its mandate. And I think the other thing that I've often been aware of, radio is fairly efficient, fairly cheap radio services. They're not incredibly expensive. But in many parts of, for example, Ontario, you can't get the main French language radio station. And if you do, it's on the AM band and the reception is awful. So there's another example on how, you know, there's a cheap, efficient, effective way to deliver French language services on radio that aren't happening right now. You know, in my part of southwestern Ontario, it's almost impossible to get French language services on a radio station from CBC, from Radio-Canada. So those are just two things that I would point out that a better job could be done in fulfilling parts or sections 4 and 6 of the 1991 Broadcasting Act. So maybe you could respond to those two issues.
Sure. We would like to extend our radio services in both French and English. We were asked, actually, to make a proposal as to how to do this by, if memory serves, I think it was originally the Heritage Committee. And we did. We tabled a report with them almost 2 years ago now. Maybe longer. Was it 2 years ago, Sean? 2 years ago. Proposing exactly some means of doing that. So we totally agree. And I totally agree with you as well, as I agree with every member of the committee. This is why I'm a little bit struck by it, that the CBC has a fundamental responsibility to reflect and to interpret both great cultures to each other. I totally agree with that. I totally agree with the premise of every single question here. I totally agree with it. And that's why, as I mentioned, we've put such a long effort into figuring out how to do these things together and how to make this interpretation, but in a way, as I was saying earlier on, that actually works, given our different audiences and given our different cultures. I mean, I say this personally, when I was saying earlier on that I wanted a show called Au Courant, and I wanted Mitsu to do the show because I wanted a show that was going to actually provide a window into French culture every single week. It was my idea to redo Rumeurs and to do it as Rumors. Same thing with Les Hauts et les Bas de Sophie Paquin. When it comes to journalists, we also agree with you. Many of our international journalists actually now report in both languages. Although I have to tell you, just finding people who can work in both languages is a challenge because it presupposes a level of fluency that's rare. But we completely agree with that. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, we've done over 200 different pieces together in the last little while. We have my colleague Sylvain Lafrance and I are jointly responsible for a fund within the organization that is dedicated to this very purpose, which is to make things that will work well in both French and English. So I completely agree. My only point in all this, and but I think it's an important point, is that we have to do this in a way which is congenial from the point of view of the audiences. Because if we do things that the audiences don't like or don't understand, we're not making any progress. We're not making any progress because they'll just say, I don't know what that's about, and they'll turn it off. So how that actually helps the situation, I don't know. What I think helps the situation are programs that people find interesting, entertaining, stimulating, that they want to watch, but explore these issues in a way that is satisfactory.
I think
You can't.
Merci beaucoup. Merci, Monsieur Chong.
Thank you, Mr. Chong and Mr. Stursberg. We'll now start our second round of questions. These will be 5-minute questions, and we'll begin with Mr. Pablo Rodriguez. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Stursberg, the gala includes all singer-songwriters. That includes francophones, does it not, throughout the country? So there's no equivalent in French. This is a program, a gala, that includes all of Canada, both anglophones and francophones. Yes. And can you tell me why Mr. Martin Duchesne resigned in January? I have no idea. Because from what we understand, you're talking about Mr. Frank Davies? No, Mr. Martin Duchesne. No, I'm sorry, I don't. From what we understood, he was against the idea of withdrawing Francophone performers from this program. Now, let's talk about years past. Were there Francophones included in the 44 minutes? No. Ever at all? Never. Did people know that this year? Well, I assume they did, because that was our policy. Yes, but did you tell people? Did you tell Claude Dubois? Yes. I quoted from the contract. Now, I can't tell you what all the conversations are that took place between the Hall of Fame and Claude Dubois, but what I do know is that his contract clearly states what we were going to do with respect to television programming. Fine. But then, if I follow your reasoning, for 3 years you've been going through the same exercise and you have been including no francophones within those 44 minutes. So the pattern is well known. Yes. And according to your own statements, you won't put music, you won't include music that people won't necessarily understand or refer to. So everyone knew in advance there would be no francophones. Yes. So next year we already know what will happen. Yes, but let me point out that it depends on the platform. On Radio 2, we had 2 or 3 hours of the show, and we included all the francophones. And what about Radio 1? I believe Radio 1 lasted 1 year, but there were francophones included. Now, television, though, is another creature. We only had 44 minutes. And as I pointed out, there was the death of Oscar Peterson, and we decided to include Paul Anka and Oscar Peterson. But we also decided to exclude other Anglophones. And I gave you the list. Yes, I understand that. But the pattern exists. It's a fact that you exclude Francophones each time. And so I'm presuming you'll be doing the same thing next year. You said to Mr. Godin that you agree with that policy and you would do the same thing today. Yes. So you'll be doing the same thing next year? So can you tell Francophones that they will be excluded well in advance? Well, listen. We're having an interesting conversation about this. And I was actually quite surprised by the reaction throughout the country with respect to this decision. And because of that, we are, in fact, thinking about what we'll do in the future. We still haven't made a decision about what we'll be doing with respect to this specific show. But if you follow your same pattern, Mr. Stursberg, and if you have to cut a 3-hour program down to 44 minutes, and if I read your reasoning, which is to include things that Anglophones understand, and in listening to you today, I hear you saying that you agree with what happened in the past, so I don't see why you would change anything in the future. You'll be doing the exact same thing, so I would ask, out of respect for Canadian performers, that you tell them that they will not be broadcast in your program. Well, as I pointed out, I reject the idea out of hand that we have no respect for Quebec performers. And as I pointed out, we have made a considerable, major effort to reflect both cultures in our programming. Now, my CBC's main goal and I think we have done a very good job at this, is to do this. And to just isolate one case, to single out one program. Yes, but we were talking about the Canadian Gala. Is there any Francophone Gala? No. There's no Francophone Gala. There's only one gala for all Canadian music, and that includes French music. So, Canadian music includes our performers from Quebec, Francophone performers from Canada. That's the program I listen to. Right? Yes? Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez. Mr. Stursberg, if you have a quick comment, you can go ahead with that. Well, I'm afraid I may repeat myself, but as I pointed out earlier, yes, this is all very important. We made certain decisions, but as I pointed out, our colleagues from Radio-Canada decided to not broadcast the gala at all. Thank you, Mr. Stursberg. And that's their decision. Thank you. We'll now go to the government side with Daniel Petit.
Thank you. Greetings, Mr. Stursberg. We asked you to come here today to try and determine what happened at the Songwriters Hall of Fame Gala. Now, naturally, you saw that there was an outcry. A great many people complained. And in Quebec and Canadian newspapers, there were indeed questions raised about this broadcast. We asked you to come here today because I think that you understand the questions we all have, which are that the gala is the apotheosis, the epitome of Canadian culture. And you as an institution are subject to the application of linguistic duality and to multiculturalism. You have a mandate in that regard. There was an event, and I believe that you did not respect your mandate with regard to that broadcast. I consider that when you invited all the artists, and within 44 minutes, I think you could have had the decency to ensure that at least some Francophones were presented, because I don't agree with your version stating that, you stated that your target audience didn't want to hear Francophones during this gala. Now, I'm sorry, I can watch English TV, and if there is one place where culture is strong, is, for example, if we look at the U.S., they always put the focus on their music. How can I influence Anglophones then? It's by focusing on my culture. So I think that your reasoning, whereby you say, well, in Toronto, they were the only ones who wanted, the audience in Toronto only wanted to hear English musicians. But you don't know what everyone throughout Canada thinks. There are many English Canadians who would have liked to have heard Francophone artists. And I think that CBC went ahead and decided that within these 44 minutes, that Francophones would not even get 1 minute. And I think that's highly insulting, and that's why you're there today, not for any other reason. The other thing we want to know is, when you said, yes, but we broadcast 3 hours on Radio 2, and also 1 or 2 hours on Radio 1. Radio-Canada, the radio in the Quebec City region, it has a very low audience ratings. No one listens to it. So don't tell me that it's a modern medium. Television is important. If I want to see my artists, if I want to see them dance, sing, express themselves, and if I want the other culture to witness this, then we need TV. My question is simple. Where are you heading? Because further to the question of one of my colleagues earlier, you seem to be saying that you plan to do exactly the same thing next year with the gala. So are you going to cut Francophone artists again? Or are you going to plan meetings so that this broadcast is changed? I'm criticizing you, but I'm not criticizing you personally. It's CBC. I want to know whether you're going to decide that you're going to devote at least 1 minute or 2 to Francophone artists. I think it's the least that we can expect. We pay 33% of your budget, so I think that's where we have the right to expect that. Mr. Stursberg, you have 1 minute. Well, I'm going to repeat myself again. We are going to consider what we will be doing with the Songwriter Hall of Fame in Gala in future. I've been listening to you, and I've tried to explain our reasons, and I understand clearly that you are rejecting my reasons as concerns that broadcast. So I'm listening to you. Thank you, Mr. Stursberg. We will now go to the third round of questioning with Mr. Damour. I'm sorry. I've made a mistake here. No, we're going to continue our second round, and we're going to hear from Mr. Gravel from the Bloc Québécois. Yes, please, Mr. Chair, please don't cut me. I'm going to get straight to the point, Mr. Stursberg. If Claude Dubois had sung in English, would he have been kept on the broadcast? Probably not, because he is not very well known by English language audiences. And as I said, our time was very limited. And we had the problem of the tribute to Oscar Peterson, so our time was very limited. But I'd like to come back again to what I said before. The problem, and this was our reasoning, and you may not accept it, but as I said, in our minds, we did not keep Claude Dubois in the program because he is not well known. And I don't want people to change channels. I want them to continue to watch CBC. I'm very limited in time with my questions, so I'd like to know, what is your suggestion to ensure that Francophone or Quebec singers can be better known in Canada? How can we disseminate them and get them known in Canada if we never hear them sing or if they're never broadcast? Because you said the English language audiences don't want to hear them, but it's a circle. What are ways of getting them known? Answer. We have had a great deal of exchanges on the radio, but I'm talking about TV. Yes, I understand. But indeed, the best medium for music is radio, not TV. And we have produced a number of programs with Francophones singing in French. On the radio, we have no problem with that. Question, but if it's true that there are Francophones who sing on English radio, then why aren't they better known by English language audiences, and why can't you incorporate them into TV broadcasting? I think I've explained it many times now. As I said, to do so, I think that the best way of doing so is by doing it through radio, because it's a better medium for music. Mr. Stursberg, it seems to me then that for the next gala, if you're going to invite Francophones, what's the point of them going if they're going to be cut out during the editing? There's no point in them going. It's offensive for Francophones to be invited. Tell them that they're just not going to be invited. Hold a purely English gala, English language gala. Answer. Well, but a gala is a gala. We can honor Francophones and Anglophones during the gala. And as I said, we broadcast all 3.5 hours of the gala on Radio 2. I understand, but we decided that for the 44 minutes available for TV, a question. But on French-Canadian TV, we do hear English singers. Mr. Stursberg, Radio-Canada decided not to disseminate the gala on TV. And I respected the decision of my French-language colleagues at Radio-Canada. If they had presented the gala and cut all the Anglophones and kept the Francophones, I don't know if it would have been broadcast. Well, there's no problem. I respect that French-language audiences know French artists better. But, Mr. Stursberg, that's why there's a sovereigntist movement in Quebec. The answers that you've provided there. I'm a sovereigntist, and it's due to attitudes and behaviors of Anglophones like you. I don't think it helps to bring the two solitudes together. Mr. Stursberg, as I said, I agree wholeheartedly with the premise of your questions. I believe that it is an essential objective of CBC to build bridges between the two cultures. I gave you many examples of what we've done in the past and what we plan to do. The only thing is that we have made certain decisions as concerns the 44 minutes of the gala. That's all I'm saying. But to build bridges, I agree wholeheartedly. You referred to Mitsou earlier, who was popular as a Quebec singer. Now, I just want to say that she was. Just wanted you to know that she wasn't known for her voice in Quebec. We will continue with Mr. Yvon Godin. Thank you, Mr. Chair. At the gala, Mr. Stursberg, was there an English language audience and a French, and were there any French language people attending the gala? I don't know. You don't know? No, I don't know. I wasn't at the gala myself. But I presume that there were Francophones attending the gala because there were Francophones who were honored. Well, I want to understand then why people are invited to a gala and you recognize English language artists. But aren't you worried that people who don't know, that artists who are not known, don't you think that aren't you worried that the whole audience will go outside to smoke a cigarette during that time? Because I want to come back to singers because we're talking about singers. Do you know in Canada we have many people, there are many couples where the man is a Francophone and the woman is Anglophone or vice versa, and these people watch CBC. I'll give you an example. In Northern Ontario, in White River, one of my brothers is married to an Anglophone, and they watch CBC. But I watch CBC, and if someone starts to sing in French, I don't think they're going to change the channel. What concerns me is that you think that you have an English language audience and they're going to change the channel if they hear French. Everything that you say runs contrary to the message we're getting. We'll take 45 minutes of programming to promote culture, but anytime if there's French, you're afraid that the English language audience will change the channel? Answer. I can repeat again. No, that's all right. If you're going to repeat yourself, then please don't bother. You apologized. Why did you apologize? In the letter that I wrote? I apologized. I'm going to actually read the letter because I want to repeat what I want to make sure that I quote it verbatim. You said that you could have done better to reflect the diversity, but just a minute, please. I'm going to find the exact words.
On behalf of CBC Television, I would like to express our concern and regret over the reaction to last Monday's broadcast of performances which took place during the Canadian Songwriters Hall of Fame Gala. The broadcast, in trying to represent in 44 minutes activities which took place over 3 hours, did not include performances from all inductees, and specifically there were no Francophone artists included. The entire musical presentation of all participants was made available on CBC English Radio 2 on Sunday evening. It was our view that the broadcast on CBC's English language network and directed at an Anglophone audience should focus on music and musicians most familiar to that audience. That's what we've been talking about all morning. And I know that you disagree with that view, but that was our view. I'm just saying. Upon reflection and based upon the negative reaction to the television broadcast, we acknowledge that we could have done a better job of reflecting the full diversity of the participants.
How could you do that then? If you disagree with us this morning, how could you do that? Could you explain what you will do in the future? Because you said you could do a better job.
As I said, what we are doing is we're thinking about what to do under the circumstances. We have not made up our minds at this point. As I was saying earlier on, we've come down here to talk about it, to listen to you, to hear your concerns about it. And, you know, once we've had a chance to reflect on what everybody has said to us, then we'll figure out what to do. But I would can I cite the last paragraph, since I think it's really important? Sure. Certainly, there was no intent to offend any particular artists by excluding them, although we recognize how this perception could exist, and for that we offer our apologies. This is why I come back to it over and over. I don't think that any of the members of this committee or the management of the CBC disagree about our profound responsibility to actually do this. But
you talk about the death of one person with cut it shorter.
Mr. Godin, thank you very much. We're going to continue with Mr. Damour. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Stursberg, for appearing here this morning. I think it's extremely important. I represent a riding in northern New Brunswick with a considerable proportion of Anglophones and of bilingual families with at least one Francophone and one Anglophone in the residence. I'm just going to take a few seconds. Concerning your letter of apology, you read it to us in English. I do hope that you have a French version as well, because the reality, Mr. Stursberg, is that if an Anglophone did not know that there were Francophones appearing on the Songwriters Gala, then they weren't affected by that. It was the Francophones, I think, who were very insulted. So I think that the letter of apology was initially written in French and then also in English, so that Anglophones could understand that CBC had made an extremely wrong-headed decision to completely cut out all Francophone artists from the gala. So was the letter of apology written in French for Francophones? Unfortunately, I don't have a French copy with me, but obviously there were two versions, one version in French and one in English. Earlier, I would ask that you table the letters. With pleasure. Do we have a copy in French with us? Yes, we do. Excuse me, Mr. Damour. Thank you very much, Mr. Stursberg. I have noted that you will table the French and English versions of the letter to our clerk, please. Thank you. Mr. Damour, go ahead. Please add in the time, please, that was taken by your words, Mr. Chair. Mr. Stursberg, was it CBC that filmed the gala? No, it was an independent production. Was it CBC that had commissioned the recording of the gala? If it was CBC then, if it was CBC then, could you explain why you didn't ask these people why didn't you ask them, if you knew that you didn't want the French sections to appear on CBC, why didn't you just simply ask them to save money? We don't want to hear the Francophone artists on our program. So you did it just to save face and to give the impression to people that they were going to perhaps have a chance to show their talent to other Francophones in the country. But you thought, okay, we're going to save face, we're going to film everything, so that the Francophones who were being filmed, at least they would have known more clearly that they would never have had a chance to break through in the Anglophone community. Because that's the direction I'm seeing here. To come back to one of the questions, in my writing, that's the reality in numerous families. Children have one parent who is Anglophone and one who is Francophone. There are parents, at least one of the spouses will watch French language programs, and then they'll switch over to the two English programs. Don't you think that within that, to say that your audience will change the channel, don't you think that you're exaggerating? Because your audience is also people where where families share the two languages. And in other circumstances, there were Anglophones who want to learn more about the French culture. How do you think this reflects on our country's cultural diversity if, in your personal impressions at the outset, you think that Anglophones will change the channel? Maybe the Anglophones want to learn about the French culture. Maybe they want to hear emerging French artists. We're talking about the Songwriting Gala, the Canadian Songwriting Hall of Fame. Don't you think that there are both Anglophones and Francophones who would be interested in seeing who those artists are, regardless of their mother tongue? Now, you and CBC may not be as open to that idea, but the Canadian public, whether it is Anglophone or Francophone, is open to learning other things in different cultures. I agree with you. But I must tell you that if we refer to New Brunswick, then we're talking about one of the regions of our country that is the most bilingual and bicultural. I can assure you that it is not the same thing in Toronto at all, or even in Western Canada. Mr. Stursberg, I'm going to give you an example. I have close relatives who live in Manitoba. One of my family members is Francophone, and the other one is an Anglophone. And the children watch CBC in both languages. They watch TV in both languages. Don't you think that it would be building on their culture for those people to show them that Francophones can do a good job as well throughout the country? Answer. We offer English language services and French language services. We do not offer bilingual services. And I understand very well that there are people who are perfectly fluent in both languages. In New Brunswick, in Quebec City, in Eastern Ontario. But unfortunately, the reality of our country is that there are many people who do not speak a word of French. Not a word. Unfortunately, in Toronto, that's the reality. I'm from Toronto. Thank you, Mr. Stursberg. You may go into detail a little bit later. Now, all of the parliamentarians have expressed themselves. Mr. Lebel has not spoken yet. Are there representatives of other parties who would like to take the floor? Fine then. We will continue the round of questions. Mr. Nadeau, you have a point to make. Mr. Godin, no, that's fine. I have Mr. Nadeau, no, rather, Mr. Lebel, and Mr. Godin. Mr. Lebel, this is just a little update, so Mr. Lebel, the floor is yours. Thank you very much, Mr. Stursberg, for your presentation, and thank you for being here. You know that I am like the other people. I don't agree with the approach you took in this issue. We as parliamentarians have the duty to promote both official languages in our country, and we do that with pleasure. Bravo, I commend you for your work and for your efforts. But it is in small details that the truth shines through. And this is a very important broadcast, a National Songwriting Hall of Fame gala, and I know that it has been produced for 4 years, and I think that there's been an error made every year. We need to ensure a Francophone presence within the gala, and it needs to be televised. And so when Mr. Claude Dubois is cut out, he's one of the best Francophone singers in the world. He should be a broadcast regardless of the language that he expresses himself in. I'm very surprised. Now, this is a business decision, if I understand clearly, Mr. Stursberg. It's a question of supply and demand. There's a greater demand for English, so it's a business decision not to offer French language programming. Is that right? Indeed. We took a decision with regard to the nature of our territory. We wanted to focus on what would interest our audience. Okay, well then I'm going to follow further business decisions of the CBC because I think you have budgetary obligations, but that's your mandate is not to amputate part of part of cultural programming. No, it was not for financial reasons. As I told you, we made a decision the time was limited. We had to make a decision, and we decided to place the emphasis on Oscar Peterson and Paul Anka. That was the decision we made, and I understand. I understand that you believe that we made a mistake. I'm going to go on to another question, Mr. Stursberg. Is it true that the members of the Hall of Fame insisted that Mr. Dubois' presentation be disseminated during the broadcast? Which members do you mean? I think the president of the Hall of Fame wrote a letter and asked that we broadcast Claude Dubois' presentation. And as I said, we did it for the radio. We did it on the radio, but not on TV. So when you say that you are considering a future galas, and we know that the president asked you to include Claude Dubois, are things going to be the same in future then? As I said earlier, I heard what you said earlier, but I just want to know. You'll be consulting the Hall of Fame. The president of Hall of Fame asked you to include Dubois. You did not do so. And so you are saying that you're now consulting the Hall of Fame. So if that's your reference, then, well, yes, I talked about Peter Steinmetz on several occasions because we had to react to the outcry. Before going on to the next question, I just want to say that Robert Vade, which is in my writing, won the Hockeyville contest. And when you come with Don Cherry, you will be welcomed very warmly, and we're going to speak in both official languages. And we will also be very happy to continue promoting both official languages in our beautiful country and in my writing of Robert Vade Lac Saint-Jean. I'm going to close by saying that CBC Radio-Canada has a mandate. I think we can do business in both French and English, but I think that when it comes to the annual gala of Canadian music, I think we must allow the Canadian audience, all of the Canadian audience, both on TV and in radio, to come into contact with Francophone culture, whether it be from Quebec or elsewhere in the country. Thank you, Mr. Lebel. So I'm going to come back to Mr. Nadeau and then Mr. Godin. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Stursberg, here are some observations. You are a public company, a public corporation. So, in my opinion, there are 25% of Canadians are francophones. So obviously Quebec is a critical mass, but there are other francophones across Canada in other regions. They must be able to find their echo in an annual songwriting gala. They must be able to, they must be included, even if they have a different language and culture, in a pan-Canadian gala. I think that that's essential. It's as if we decided to show only some goals being scored in a hockey game because they were scored by someone who speaks a different language from someone else. There would be something that would be wrong with the game. Now, once again, here we're talking about songs. We're not talking about a broadcast where the texts are in French throughout, where the script is in French. We're talking about songs. The songs could be sung in any language. Cashin, the Aboriginal group, the Naskapis from the North Shore, they sing their songs in Montagnais. And I've seen them on CBC and on Radio-Canada, and they're not cut simply because they're not singing in French or English. And the message that you are leaving us with, now I'm a sovereigntist, but the message that you're conveying is that you are refusing, you are turning your back on Quebec, Canadian, Acadian culture during a major gala. Now, I have English language friends who want to know what is happening on the Quebec music scene, on the Acadian music scene, on the Franco-Canadian scene. They're just as interested in this music as they are in international music and English-Canadian music. So please, we pay our taxes Quebecers pay their taxes just as much as Anglophones do, and in a Songwriters Hall of Fame gala that reflects all of Canadian territory, where the two official language communities are reflected there, and you have the Quebec Nation and the Canadian Nation. Both of these must be reflected both on TV and on the radio. So please, I don't want to hear any more about English language audiences not wanting to watch it. It's a public television. If they want to watch private television, whether it be Canadian or Quebec or American, they could do so. But if they are turning to CBC to watch the Songwriters Hall of Fame Gala, then they must be able to hear both Eva Avila, who sings in Spanish, Portuguese, French, and English, and they should be able to hear Claude Dubois just as much, even though you say he is not as well known. You need to disseminate all artists and make sure that they are introduced to other cultures. This is not a question, it's a comment, and I hope that you will take these remarks into account for the next gala. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Nadeau. Mr. Godin, Mr. Coder, and then Mr. Chong are next on the list. Mr. Godin, go ahead. Mr. Stursberg, you were referring to Francophone communities in Quebec and in Acadia. I don't know if you're aware, but with all the jobs that are being created in Alberta, in the oil industry, there are a great many Francophones who live in Alberta. They have moved there. There are many people there, and I'm talking about places where maybe they can't even get Radio-Canada. You have to look and see what's happening in our country in terms of official languages. We're discussing the whole official language situation in this country. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that CBC should turn into a French language station. We have Radio-Canada, which is French language, and CBC, which is English language. Now, I think that that's clearly acknowledged. Now, you're saying that there's a problem with one song, and you're worried that the English language audiences are going to change the channel. Okay, we have trouble accepting that. If Claude Dubois wasn't well known, then I don't know why he was invited to the Songwriting Hall of Fame Gala. You don't invite someone who's not well known. Someone decided to invite him, and the president even asked him to ask that he be disseminated. And also heard that, okay, there needed to be a tribute paid to someone who has died, but I mean, there wasn't a tribute paid to someone who died every single year. Now, we have to be honest here. The attitude of CBC is the same attitude as that of Radio-Canada. If it's not Montreal, then it doesn't exist. There are 6 million people in Quebec, in the province of Quebec. All the artists have to go to Montreal. And we have the same problem in Acadia. It's the ratings. It's all about ratings. But we have to remember that CBC and Radio-Canada are funded by taxpayers. It's a public corporation, and it should be able to show culture throughout the country. That's what we want. I'm not talking about a half-hour report of someone who talks in French and the English language audiences don't understand them. There I understand CBC. It's as if Radio-Canada produced a report in English. Same thing. The Francophones won't understand. But here, I think that the straw that broke the camel's back is when we're talking about songs, about singing. That's a universal language. And I would just like to make a recommendation, is that you should seriously look at where we're going with that. Thank you for your comments.
I think what's rather surprising about this is something about their funding. As I pointed out earlier, we did not make this decision for financial reasons. However, we do face financial difficulties. We're talking about a public broadcaster, yes. However, 55% of our budget this year will come from the private sector. 55% of our budget. And so in that regard, I think we are a broadcaster that is as private as it is public, and that puts some pressure on us. Now, I'm not giving that as an excuse for our decision in this specific case, but that is the reality we're dealing with. Thank you. I understand this is a public corporation and the government should be providing more money in order to be able to reflect our reality. I agree with that. Well, I'll be frank, we are underfunded. And with respect to our funding compared to other public broadcasters in the world, we are at the bottom of the list. Now, we know the Americans don't necessarily have the same cultural issues that we have in Canada, but if you compare CBC's funding with BBC, the BBC is given 3 times more funding per capita than we are to broadcast in one language alone. And here we have to broadcast in both. I'm not arguing you that on that point. And we have said that the government has a responsibility towards public broadcasting. But I'm talking about songwriters in this case. Yes, I understand what you're saying. But some decisions would be easier to make if we were in a better funding situation. Thank you, Mr. Stursberg. And we'll now carry on with our last round, and we'll start with Mr. Coder. Mr. Stursberg. I can understand by your attitude this morning why people have felt insulted. I do not feel a CBC is private. It is public. It's legislated, and its mandate is specific. It's supposed to represent Canada. And I've been listening to you since the very beginning. And I sort of hear as a background theme the Titanic movie soundtrack. If I were the president of CBC, I would call you before me and we'd have a very clear conversation. I would like to know who ultimately decided to produce this program. Ourselves? So you are the person responsible for producing this? Yes. Do you know Pascal Picard? No, I don't. Well, you should. She sings in English. She's a beautiful Quebecer, and she won a Juno last weekend. And the Anglophones like her a lot. And do you know why she's more and more liked? Because we've seen her on CBC. And that's how this works. Do you have marketing studies that have shown that because a performer is Francophone, then Anglophones will turn their TV off? I mean, what do you base your conclusions on? That the person doesn't come from Toronto? I mean, you should hear yourself speak. Do you have marketing studies that you could table today that tell you that this is how it works? That when there's a Francophone on an English TV, the TV is turned off? Do you have any studies that show you that? I mean, what is the basis of your decision? I know you were the head of Telefilm Canada. You know what the cultural situation is in Canada. You have funded filming, and you know how cinema works, and you know what its impact is within the world and within Canada. So what is the basis of your decision today? To conclude that Anglophones will turn the channel, turn the TV off if there's a Francophone there. Well, I base it on my experience. There were many French films that were funded when I was at Telefilm, and they were enormously successful. I named a few this morning. Allow me to make a point. There was La Grande Séduction, Les Invasions Barbares. There were many other movies. And here's what I was struck by. There was an enormous success. That was 25% of the market that we had when I was at Telefilm. Just a minute. You're the witness. You have to answer my question. What I want to know is whether you have any studies that have shown you that people turn the TV off when they see Francophones on English TV. Well, when we have subtitled French movies, including Denis Arcand's movie that won an Oscar for Best Foreign Film, the audience response was to not go to the movie. And that is a problem. Well, then, from what I understand, if certain segments have been cut, it's because you think Anglophones won't watch. Well, you asked me what our reasoning was, and if it's based on marketing studies. And your answer is no? Or our judgment, says the witness. And I have to say that it is based on our judgment and our experience. Mr. Chairman, I also happen to be official critic for official languages and the francophonie. And I don't think you've actually passed my test today. I think we need to call Radio-Canada and the President before us. And I think my colleagues should make sure that we go a little higher up, because if this is your attitude, I'd like to know what the President's attitude is. So that's my first point. And I'm sorry, it's my turn right now. Mr. Chairman, CBC, Radio-Canada, has not helped Canada through this. Now, I'm not going to use the extreme wording that Claude Dubois used, and the word racism, but this is a very condescending and arrogant attitude. And you, sir, are actually provoking both solitudes in this country through your attitude. We'll continue with Mr. Chong. Mr. Chong, I would just like to say that I completely reject Mr. Coderre's remarks. I am not anti-Francophone, and I am not against Francophone culture in Canada. It is simply not true. And as I stated earlier, I have made major efforts to bridge both cultures. And as I said earlier, and I will repeat this, our main goal as a corporation is to build those bridges at CBC. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Stursberg, you've got, as a corporation, two broad responsibilities that you have to fulfill as part of your mandate. And, you know, certainly I think that you've been underfunded in recent years, but that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about today about your mandate and how you are fulfilling it. And broadly speaking, you've got a mandate to reflect the diversity of the country, as it's stated in Section 8 of the Broadcasting Act, to reflect the multiracial and multicultural nature of Canada. But you also have a responsibility to reflect the linguistic duality of the country and to build a shared national consciousness and identity. And my view is that you're doing some of that well, but you're not doing other parts of it well. You know, if I think of, I'm a Toronto area member of Parliament, and I listen to CBC Radio 1 all the time, and I watch the main television network all the time. And I think, especially in the last 4 or 5 years, both those products, Radio 1 and the main television network, have really started to reflect the diversity of the Greater Toronto Area. And I think CBC has done a very good job in that regard. But when I think about the other part of your mandate, which is to build this shared national consciousness and identity, an integral part of which is the linguistic duality of the country, I think in that regard, in the Greater Toronto Area, you've completely neglected that part of your mandate. I don't, you know, other than, you know, the occasional program here and there, you would have no clue that we live in a, you know, that Canada is an officially bilingual country, that its federal institutions are officially bilingual. You wouldn't have a clue of that if you were to listen to Radio 1 or to the main television network as a resident living in the Greater Toronto Area. The newscasts at the top of the hour on Radio 1 are in no way linked to the newscasts at the top of the hour on La Première chaîne. The National on the main television network each night is pretty disconnected from Le Téléjournal on Radio-Canada. So, you know, I think in that regard, you know, as I said before, you're doing some things well, but in terms of bridging the linguistic duality of the country, you're not. If I look at Radio-Canada in Quebec, I think the opposite is true. Obviously, you're fulfilling your mandate when it comes to delivering French language programming there, and I think arguably you're much more successful as a corporation there than in English-speaking Canada because of the fact that we're living in an English-speaking continent. But in terms of reflecting the diversity, the increasing diversity of the country, I don't get the sense that that's happening on, in French language programming to the extent that's happening in English language programming. So I do think there's big areas for improvement, and that's one of the reasons why we have you here today. I think when we go on a tangent about, other issues, then people start getting prickly about that stuff. But I do think it's important that the corporation looks at this stuff in the longer term, because this is going to be the big challenge facing this country, and I would hope that CBC would have a big role to play in bridging those solitudes and in trying to meet its mandate.
Well, as I said throughout the course of the morning, I don't disagree with you at all. I completely agree with you, and I agree with all of the members here as to the nature of our responsibilities. But I'm a little bit surprised to hear you say this, because if at any time in the last 2 years you turned on CBC English television, you would have seen the remake of Rumeur, you would have seen the remake of Sophie Paquin.
No, I understand that, but for example, for example, then why are the domestic news gathering journalists? Why is there very little crossover between the two organizations in terms of delivering the news? The stories that you see on The National, the stories that you see on Le Téléjournal are completely different when it comes to domestic news. Another example, there's 60,000 Francophones living in the Greater Toronto Area, more than in many provinces. That's just in one city region. Yet we don't have proper coverage of La Première Chaîne. You can't really get CBC, La Première Chaîne, the French language service, in any sort of quality in the Greater Toronto Area, even though there are 60,000 or more Francophones living in that region, more than in many provinces, including Manitoba or British Columbia. The point I'm making is that there's room for improvement, and so to so breezily dismiss the fact that there isn't room for improvement is, I think, the reason why so many members of the committee are being prickly today.
Nobody disagrees that there's room for improvement. This is why I was saying that, we've worked very hard in terms of the foreign bureaus to make sure they report in both French and English. We're working very hard to make sure the domestic bureaus are more bilingual. We've been working very hard across all of those sorts of things, but the truth of the matter is that if you ask people to broadcast in both languages, they have to have a level of bilingualism that is rare. That's all I'm saying. It's very difficult to do. And we would like to do more.
Okay.
Absolutely. We're totally with you on this point.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sturzberg. Okay, Monsieur Gravel.
Mr. Gravel. Earlier, Mr. Sturzberg, you said that you're not anti-Francophone, and I take you at your word. And you also said that you support building bridges between Francophone and Anglophone cultures. Well, it seems to me you had a perfect opportunity at the gala. You had a perfect opportunity to do that. Why didn't you take advantage of that to build that kind of bridge? Well, I'll repeat exactly what I've said often this morning. We made a decision to include all of the gala on Radio 1 and Radio 2, but to only have 44 minutes on TV. And we made the subsequent decision. I really don't know what I can say on top of that. I do understand that you feel that that was a mistake on our part. I understand. Do you regret your decision? As I stated, we are looking at what we should do next year. I'm here this morning to listen to you and to have this type of conversation. And that will inform me. That will inform our decisions and thought process. Well, if you make the same decision at the next gala, please don't invite Francophones, because you can't really invite Francophones and then not include them. So make it an Anglophone gala. and continue to maintain the two solitudes we mentioned earlier. But don't invite Francophones if they then can't be included in the program. I mean, that's just common sense. Well, you have to understand that we aren't the ones who invite people to the gala. It's the gala. So this isn't organized by the CBC. The gala is an independent organization. It has nothing to do with the CBC. Well, if the gala invites then Francophones, then I think they should be included in the program. Both cultures have to be respected, or this is a useless process. Thank you very much, Mr. Gravel. That wraps up our round of questions. I could perhaps give a couple of minutes to you each, to Mr. Rodriguez and Mr. Petit. And then I would like to hear our witnesses' concluding remarks. Mr. Rodriguez, Mr. Stursberg, you've listened to my colleagues from the Bloc Québécois. You heard them say that that was one reason why they're sovereignists. So you realize that when the actions on your part, such as this one, do not actually help Canada. They help the sovereignist movement. And you continue to maintain those two solitudes in perpetuity. You're aware of that. I mean, you're not going to broadcast Francophones to Anglophones and vice versa. So we'll be keeping those two solitudes apart forever if we continue like this. And if CBC doesn't do this, if CBC doesn't bring Anglophones into contact with the Francophones, then who can do it? Who will do it? Well, I'm going to say once again that I absolutely agree with you. We understand our mandate to reflect both cultures in this country. However, this was a decision with respect to the gala, and you have to put that in the context of all this corporation's activities. No. Why not? Because you missed an opportunity here. Now, one of my colleagues asked you if Claude Dubois had sung in English, would he have been included? You said no, he's not well known. So if Céline Dion had sung in French, would she have been included? Well, she's very well known in Canada. Thank you. Mr. Petit, with your permission, I'll give my time to Mr. Chong.
CBC's mandate is not to reflect the cultural duality of the country. It's to reflect the multicultural nature of the country, but the country's linguistic duality. There is a difference, and I think it's very important for all members of the committee to know this. We are not a bicultural country. We are a multicultural country with two official languages, and there is a difference. And so the CBC's mandate is to reflect that multicultural, multiracial nature, while at the same time promoting its linguistic duality with respect to the two official languages.
Monsieur Chong, rapidement, Monsieur Petit, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you. Then briefly, Mr. Petit, I'd like to draw the witness's attention to another point. You may not be the person we should have invited. Perhaps we should have called the president of the CBC. But there's something that I'm concerned about in your testimony. And Mr. Lebel raised this. You said that this was not a business decision, that you decided that people in Toronto wouldn't necessarily listen to Francophones. And you said something else. You said if you had more money, because you said you only get 55% of your funding from the government. So you're saying that if you had more funding, you would include Francophones. But if you're not given money, you don't broadcast Francophones. I don't think that's right. That was your answer. You said that you had to work as a private business, and because of this, you had to be careful about your ratings, etc. But your mandate, even if you don't have all the funding you require, your mandate is binding, and you have to respect it. You didn't do that. A comment, Mr. Stursberg? No? Then thank you, Mr. Petit. And Mr. Stursberg, I'd like to thank you for coming before the committee this morning. You reminded us that the goal of the public broadcaster have a specific mission, and that is to give French and English-speaking Canada a forum to express and showcase their experience in their language. Well, as we pointed out, our purpose as a committee is also to promote linguistic duality. You mentioned that Mr. Dubois spoke about an opportunity of bringing together Francophone and Anglophone performers during this performance. And you said you could have perhaps better reflected the diversity of the participants. From what I also understood, I think the members stated that they would like media coverage of this type of performance to reflect the Canadian diversity and linguistic duality. Thank you for your testimony today, and we'll let you know. We'll follow up on this committee's work with you. Thank you. And thank you to the members of the committee. Mr. Stursberg, did you have any concluding remarks? Mr. Chairman, I consulted my colleagues, and in light of today's testimony, and given this committee's work schedule, I would like to respectively submit that the president of the CBC be called before this committee in order to explain to us whether the attitude displayed today is a personal attitude or whether it is reflective of the CBC as a whole. And at that time, we'll be able to put questions about this event and other questions as well. Thank you. Thank you. So that's a motion. And it is in order because it is relevant to today's study. So you are moving that the committee call the president of the CBC as soon as possible before this committee. CBC Radio-Canada, are there any questions or comments on Mr. Coderre's motion?
Yes, I'll support that motion, but in the spirit that we're calling the president of the CBC to discuss how the CBC is fulfilling its mandate under the 1991 Broadcasting Act and focus on that issue as opposed to the personalities involved, because I frankly think that's more important.
Okay. Alors, est-ce que...
Well, it's my motion, so I have the last word, Mr. Chairman. I think it's clear that we can ask any and all questions that we feel are important to this committee, and I will be going a little further into this issue. I have 11 years of experience as a member of Parliament, and I think that the Francophone community feels insulted by this morning, and I will have questions to put about it. Well, I would go even further. I think if we're calling the president of the CBC before us, then I would like to know what their mandate is. So, do ratings drive the CBC? Or does its mandate drive the CBC? If we're going to bother to call the president before us, well, I have some things to say. And I think that we have to talk about Francophone communities outside Montreal, because it's always about Montreal, Montreal. This is Montreal television. It's not Canadian television. And this has always happened. And members put questions that they want to put to the witnesses. If members would like us to pass the motion, then we should move ahead. We have to leave this room soon. Mr. Lebel. I just want to say that today was a very specific issue. It was the issue of the gala. I realize that you want to broaden the scope of the debate, but today Mr. Stursberg spoke to us about the gala, so I don't think we should necessarily draw other conclusions from his testimony. But now we want to broaden the scope of the debate by inviting the president of the CBC, but I don't want us to confuse two issues. We'll then move to the vote. All those in favour of calling the president of CBC before this committee? All those against? The motion is passed unanimously. Thank you very much. And the meeting is adjourned.